Karen stood at the helm of the luxurious yacht, a crystal glass of champagne in hand, basking in the admiring glances of her friends. The evening breeze carried the sound of clinking glasses and laughter across the marina, and Karen, as always, played the role of the perfect hostess. Every detail, from the imported hors d'oeuvres to the high-end decor, was designed to impress. The guests never questioned the source of her wealth. They assumed that someone with such impeccable taste and confidence must own everything she flaunted. For months she had been parading around, letting people believe the yacht was hers. It was the key to her social power, the thing that kept her in the good graces of the elite. In reality, the vessel belonged to George, a successful entrepreneur who had made a name for himself in the luxury travel business. He had no idea that Karen was presenting his yacht as her own, until she became frantic about its sale. Karen first heard about the sale through whispers at the marina. The news sent a chill down her spine. If George sold the yacht, her charade would be exposed. How would she explain it to her friends? Worse, how would she maintain her status? She could already imagine the snide remarks, the knowing glances, the inevitable social exile. Determined to stop the sale, she approached George, putting on her most charming smile. She praised the yacht, gushed about its beauty, and then casually suggested that it would be a shame if it fell into the wrong hands. "I mean, I've practically made it my second home." She laughed, twirling a strand of hair between her fingers. "Wouldn't you reconsider keeping it a little longer?" George, who had no patience for manipulation, simply shook his head. "Karen, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I've already found a buyer. The paperwork's almost finalized." Karen's smile faltered. She wasn't used to hearing no. She pressed on, offering absurd alternatives. Perhaps he could rent it to her exclusively? Or maybe she could introduce him to other buyers who might be willing to pay more? But George wasn't interested. The decision had been made. As Karen left the marina that evening, her heels clicking against the dock, she felt her world closing in. She had to stop the sale. One way or another. The next morning, Karen stormed back to the marina, her usual polished demeanor cracked by frustration. She spotted George giving a tour of the yacht to a potential buyer, a well-dressed man nodding with interest as they discussed features. Karen's heart pounded. If she didn't act now, it would be too late. She marched straight up to them, her voice high and tight with forced politeness. "George, a word?" He sighed, excusing himself from the buyer. "Karen, this really isn't a good time." "Oh, I think it is," she snapped. "You're making a huge mistake selling this yacht. Do you even know who you're selling to? How do you know he won't ruin it?" George raised an eyebrow. "That's not your concern." Karen's face twisted with desperation, and before she could stop herself, the words spilled out. "You know, I find it very suspicious that you're suddenly in a rush to sell. I mean, did you even legally acquire this yacht?" George froze for a second, his patience thinning. "Excuse me?" Karen folded her arms, her confidence returning now that she had said it out loud. "I just think it's odd, that's all. A man like you, suddenly selling such a high-end yacht? Makes you wonder." George clenched his jaw, but before he could respond, Karen pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "Hello, yes, I need police assistance," she said, her voice dripping with fabricated distress. "There's a man trying to steal my yacht. I think he broke in, yes, he's still here. Please hurry." George exhaled sharply, exchanging a look with the buyer, who now seemed unsure. He had seen this play out before. A white woman making false accusations, the assumption of guilt placed squarely on him. He was prepared for it, but it never got any less infuriating. Within minutes, 2 uniformed officers arrived. Karen launched into her exaggerated tale, gesturing wildly toward George. "I caught him red-handed," she insisted. "I think he was trying to take it out of the marina before I got here." One officer turned to George. "Sir, can you explain what's going on?" George, staying calm, reached into his pocket and pulled out his paperwork. "I own this yacht." "She's lying," Karen scoffed, shaking her head. "Of course he has papers. But can you be sure they're real?" The officer examined the documents, then exchanged a glance with his partner. Everything was legitimate. After a brief, tense silence, one officer turned to Karen. "Ma'am, we have no reason to believe this man stole anything. If you're making a false report, that's a serious offense." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I was just looking out for the marina," she stammered. "You can never be too careful." The officers, unimpressed, gave her a warning before leaving. But the damage was already done. The buyer, now clearly uncomfortable, muttered something about needing to think things over and walked away. Karen smirked. She had bought herself some time. But George wasn't done with her yet. The marina was buzzing with its usual energy, boats bobbing on the waves, the salty air mixing with the hum of casual conversation. George stood confidently on the deck of the yacht, talking to a potential buyer. This time, the deal felt solid. The man was nodding enthusiastically, clearly impressed with the yacht's pristine condition. Karen watched from a distance, her hands gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had tried everything: manipulation, false police reports, and even stirring up doubt in the buyers, but nothing had worked. George was still selling her yacht. She had spent too much time curating the perfect image, and without this yacht, she was nothing more than an aging socialite with no real wealth to back up her lifestyle. Blinded by fury, she stormed toward the dock, her expensive heels clicking against the wooden planks. "Are you seriously still trying to sell my yacht?" she spat, her voice dripping with entitlement. George didn't even flinch. He was expecting this. He turned to her with an amused smirk. "Karen, it's my yacht. You know that. I don't have time for your nonsense today." But Karen was beyond reason. Her chest heaved with rage. The humiliation of being ignored, of losing control, was unbearable. She sneered, stepping closer. "You don't deserve a yacht like this. People like you shouldn't even be in places like this." George's eyes narrowed. "People like me?" she scoffed. "You know exactly what I mean. You think money changes anything? You'll always just be a—" She stopped, but the look in her eyes said it all. George exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Go ahead, Karen. Say what you really want to say." And then she did. With venom lacing her words, she hissed, "You're just a monkey who got lucky." The marina fell silent. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. A horrified gasp rippled through the onlookers as Karen's true colors bled through for everyone to see. The potential buyer took a step back, his expression shifting from interest to disgust. A woman nearby muttered, "Oh my God, did she really just say that?" A couple holding hands shook their heads and walked away, clearly repulsed. Karen, realizing what she had just done, tried to backtrack. I didn't mean." But it was too late. The words had already hung in the air like a toxic cloud. George, though boiling inside, refused to let her see him break. He had dealt with racism before, but this? This was different. This was personal. She had tried to ruin him, take from him, and now had the audacity to degrade him when she didn't get her way. He took a deep breath and simply nodded. "All right, Karen. That's how you really feel, huh?" Karen opened her mouth to stammer out an excuse, but George had already turned away. He wasn't wasting another second arguing with her. Instead, he had a better idea. It was time to find out who Karen really was. George spent the next few days doing what he did best: research. If Karen thought she could get away with her behavior, she was sorely mistaken. Pulling up her full name from some old marina records, he started digging into her past. Social media, archived forums, deep internet searches, he left no stone unturned. At first, he found the typical rich person fluff: charity events she had attended for PR, high-end galas where she rubbed elbows with the elite. But then, he found something much darker. Buried in the depths of the internet, linked to an old email she had used years ago, George uncovered the real Karen. She had been a member of an extremist group, a racist cult that had been spreading hate for over a decade. The group operated under the guise of an exclusive society, But in reality, it was a network of wealthy individuals who pushed discriminatory agendas and worked behind the scenes to suppress minorities in business and real estate. They had used their influence to make life harder for people like George. His stomach churned as he read through the forums, the coded language they used, the events they held. It was all there, years of Karen actively engaging in discussions that spewed hate, attending private meetings where they planned how to keep certain types of people out of their neighborhoods, and even funding political efforts to maintain these power structures. And yet, here she was, acting like she was the victim because she lost her social status. George leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about exposing the truth. He compiled everything: screenshots, archived posts, financial records linking her donations to the group. By the time he was done, he had enough information to dismantle her reputation completely. Now, it was time to put it to use. The next time Karen called the police on him, she had no idea what was coming. Karen was seething. The past few days had been a nightmare. People were whispering about her, giving her judgmental looks at her favorite restaurants, and even avoiding her calls. Something was wrong, and she knew exactly who to blame. George. That man had humiliated her. First, by taking her yacht away, then by making her slip up in front of the entire marina. But she still had one card left to play: the police. Fueled by desperation, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911 once again. Her voice trembled, but not from fear, from anger. "It's me again. I need officers down at the marina now. The man I reported before, he's still here, and he's threatening me." This time, when the officers arrived, Karen expected them to immediately take her side, to finally put George in his place. She stood on the dock, arms crossed, playing the part of the terrified victim. But George was ready. Before the officers could say a word, he calmly stepped forward, holding up his phone. "Officers, I need you to hear me out first." The lead officer hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead." George opened his phone and played a recording, Karen's voice from her last outburst, calling him a monkey. The insult was loud and clear, undeniable. The murmurs around the marina grew louder as people watched. Karen's face went pale. "And that's not all," George continued, handing the officers a file of printed documents. "This woman has been harassing me for days. False reports, trying to damage my reputation, and worst of all, she's been involved with a hate group for years." Karen's stomach dropped. The officers skimmed the documents, their expressions darkening. "Ma'am, do you want to explain this?" one of them asked. Karen sputtered, reaching for the papers. This is fake. He's lying." George cut her off. "I sent everything to your department before you even got here. I knew this would happen." The lead officer nodded, tapping his radio. "We've already reviewed it. And considering the false claims you've made before, Karen, I suggest you stop wasting our time." Karen's jaw dropped. But the worst was yet to come. Behind her, a group of well-dressed men and women stood, watching everything unfold. Karen turned to them, her friends, the ones she had spent years impressing. But their faces were different now. Disgusted. Betrayed. George turned to them and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Just in case you didn't know, Karen has been part of a racist cult for over a decade. I have proof. Screenshots, donations, everything." Gasps. Murmurs. Someone cursed under their breath. "Karen, is this true?" one of the women asked, her voice shaking. Karen's face twisted. "No! It's not what it looks like. He's making it sound worse than it is." But it didn't matter. One by one, her friends turned away from her. Some shook their heads. Others simply walked off without another word. Karen reached for them, but they moved away. The rejection was instant and absolute. "No, please wait. Nobody waited. The people she had built her life around, the ones she had spent years trying to impress, wanted nothing to do with her anymore. And George? He just smiled, tucking his phone back into his pocket. "I told you, Karen. You'd regret this. Karen staggered back, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She had lost everything. Karen's life crumbled faster than she ever thought possible. The rejection from her social circle was immediate and brutal. Calls went unanswered. Invitations stopped. The elegant brunches, charity galas, and yacht parties that once defined her existence vanished overnight. At first, she tried to do damage control. She took to social media, posting a long-winded explanation. It was a misunderstanding. It was just a joke. People are so sensitive these days. But nobody was buying it. Underneath her posts, comments flooded in. So calling someone a monkey is a joke now? You've been in a racist cult for 10 years. Own it. You're not sorry. You're just sorry you got caught. Karen deleted the post. But it was too late. Every door she had once walked through with ease was slammed shut in her face. Banks and businesses that had once valued her presence quietly distanced themselves. Even the marina, her old stomping ground, sent her a notice banning her from stepping foot on their docks ever again. The final blow came when her family, people she had always relied on for support, refused to help. Her sister's voice was cold when Karen called, her desperation barely masked. You brought this on yourself. Click. Karen sat in the darkness of her once pristine home, staring at the empty wine glass in her hand. The silence was suffocating. She had nothing left. Meanwhile, George had moved on. The yacht was officially sold, the deal finalized without a single hiccup. The new owner, an entrepreneur like himself, shook his hand and congratulated him on the smooth transaction. Standing at the marina one last time, George let out a deep breath, soaking in the victory. Karen had tried to destroy him, to drag him down with her toxicity and entitlement. But intelligence, patience, and truth had won in the end. As he walked away, the sun glinting off the water, he didn't spare a single thought for Karen. She was no longer his problem. She was just another cautionary tale.